if you've ever sent an application via any of the job platforms like LinkedIn or Indeed or ZipRecruiter, all of them use some form of AI, but also a lot of companies use AI. Almost all Fortune 500 companies use AI in their hiring funnels, resume screening, finding applicants, one-way video interviews where you get pre-recorded questions on your phone. There's no one on the other side, and you just sort of record yourself answering those questions. We see games in the hiring funnel. We see AI-based background screenings. So all along, we see it used in different ways. Companies save a ton of money,
Yeah.
a ton of labor cost, but we haven't really found any evidence that the tools pick the most qualified candidates.
I'm Misha Da Vinci. This is the Grift Podcast, conversations to get you ready for the future. We're living in a world where almost everything we do is mediated, curated, or defined in some way by artificial intelligence. On TikTok, Instagram, Twitter X, YouTube, Spotify, Google, Meta, Amazon, and every other major platform, our unique experience is determined by AI. Recommender systems decide what we see, whom we interact with, and even the facts we know or don't know about. But you already knew that. What you may not know is that algorithms have also taken over the world of work. Your job search, the job openings you see or don't see, the resume scanning, the interview process, on-the-job monitoring, whether you get promoted or fired, these are now all mostly determined by AI. My guest this week is going to tell us about the ways artificial intelligence is reshaping work life and what you can do to protect yourself. Hilke Schellmann is an Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter and assistant professor of journalism at New York University. In her book, The Algorithm, How AI Decides Who Gets Hired, Monitored, Promoted, and Fired, and Why We Need to Fight Back, she investigates the rise of AI in the world of work. Drawing on exclusive information from whistleblowers, internal documents, and real-world tests, Schellmann discovers that many of the algorithms making high-stakes decisions do more harm than good. Her 4-part investigative podcast and print series on AI and hiring for MIT Tech Review was a finalist for a Webby Award. Hilke's work has appeared in several publications, including the New York Times, Vice, HBO, PBS, Time, National Geographic, The Guardian, Glamour, and The Atlantic, among others. This is a topic and an episode you cannot afford to miss. Let's dive in and get ready for the present and future of work. Hilke, thanks for coming on. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You've written this incredible book, The Algorithm, How AI Decides Who Gets Hired, Monitored, Promoted, and Fired, and Why We Need to Fight Back. Oh, I read it. It's scary.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to scare people, but as more as I delved into this new world, this is kind of what I found.
So, and you were like super like this investigative reporter. It was so good. It was so good. I can't, and it was so succinct and so accessible. Anyway, we'll get to that. Before we get into algorithms and how they're impacting the world of work and all the scary stuff you found in your research, I want to learn a little bit about you because I'd like to establish for our listeners, like we're talking to a really nice, cool, awesome human. So tell us a little bit about you. How did you become the person that you are today?
I mean, I actually have a bachelor's and master's degree in philosophy and aesthetics, which is like subfield of philosophy. And I wasn't really interested in journalism at all when I was in college. I like to think big thoughts, but I did take a class on sort of documentaries and films, and we had to do a documentary, and my documentary really did suck. It was about pneumatic mail dispatching in Berlin, which is one of the largest systems. But, there really isn't anything visual anymore. And people talk about the past, really not great for a documentary. But I kind of loved making films and I loved the editing.
Oh. Hmm.
So, I'm not ever going to show this film to anyone, ever. But I love doing the medium. So I got really hooked on it.
Tell us a little bit about philosophy and aesthetics.
That I think has sort of like a distinct German tradition. That's where I'm from.
Ah,
It's sort of all about how we perceive the world and our senses. And so, it was just a lot of big thoughts that we thought in cultural theory. And I learned a lot about like how human cognition works. And, there was like some overlap with technology, and, sort of the idea is like, how does technology change our thoughts and how our thoughts change technology? And it's kind of interesting that I feel like the last few years have sort of come back to some of that.
Interdisciplinary sort of thinking is so critical, especially in a world of machines or world run or dominated by big tech and machines and the future we're heading into. This ability to sort of understand different fields and make connections across fields and really have a vision, I think, is so important. And I find the most interesting people that I'm talking to have this kind of background and come to tech from this sort of broader understanding of humanity. And it's super interesting, the lenses through which they look at the issues that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
How,
Yeah.
how
And I
it,
would never pretend that I have an understanding of humanity, but I think I have sort of a very broad outlook. The idea of like in a lot of, my field was also, I think, a little bit more down to earth, was sort of like the history of science, the history of technology, and how both of them have influenced each other. And I think actually we see this now a lot. So I sometimes think about it as like, oh yeah, I need to like reread some of these like foundational texts and like think about my old professors who talked about like maybe like sort of hysteria in the 19th century when sort of all these new technologies came out and people felt very uneasy. And actually, sometimes I think about it, and I'm like, I think we might be at a similar now.
yeah.
That a lot of people feel very, very uneasy about generative AI and sort of now feeling like the machines are like humans. And I think there was a lot of really similar feelings in like popular culture a few hundred years back when there was the same sort of like it felt. I'm sure it felt like to people like an acceleration of technology, like it absolutely feels today. It
Today.
feels like
So the disruption is weird, although I think this particular disruption with digital technology and these large language models and the pattern recognition, it's more in our brain. It's like this is stuff that's in our cognition, our understanding. It's different. So we have to be really prepared for this one. So you grew up in Berlin?
No, I grew up in a town that apparently doesn't exist in Germany. It's called Bielefeld. It's between Hanover and Cologne, and the people of Germany often make a joke that Bielefeld has 3 exits on the autobahn, but you never see the town. It doesn't exist because I'm from there, and so are many other people. It's sort of it's fine.
Yeah,
It has like
yeah.
350,000 people, it has a university and a mall, and it is a absolutely fine town. But I think when I graduated high school, I may have wanted to live in a bigger town, so we chose Berlin and had a really great time. My friends and I may have we may have taken a little longer to graduate because, you don't pay tuition in Germany. So you get to like explore. We had to pay like 150 euros, which is, I don't know, per semester. And you got like a train and subway ticket thrown in for free for 6 months. So it was great. I mean, the costs are really minimal. And, it's a great time to take classes that broaden your horizon and also to live your life and sort of,
Yeah,
experiment in your, in
and
your,
grow up.
yeah.
So how
Yeah,
did
live
you?
by yourself and, do the thing that now feels, maybe a little bit more normal for adults, but when you're 19, it's like, "Whoa, I
Yeah,
have to, like."
and so you live in New York now, is it? Or
Yes, yes, I did. I got stuck here. I went to, like investigative reporting doesn't really exist necessarily in Germany. We see a little bit more now, but like 10, 15 years ago, really there's a distinct American tradition of that kind of reporting. And I really wanted to do that. So I went to Columbia and got a degree there. And then I just got kind of stuck in New York, and I do love it. I still have like this intense love for Berlin, but right now
New
it's
York
all
is
about,
home.
yeah.
Okay, so what's a day like in the life of Hilke?
It's a lot of work on my computer. It's a
Mhm.
lot of projects that are going on, right? Like I'm my day job is being a professor of journalism, so I teach 2 classes, and those usually take up all my Mondays and Tuesdays. And I love working with my students, and it's like a sort of different satisfaction than my own reporting work. Like I see like how I help them, but it's their work, and I see how they, do this investigation work, and it's pretty amazing to see. And then 3 days a week, I can do absolutely my own projects. So a couple of years ago, I was writing every day. I was writing the book, and now I do a lot of like presentations about the book, and I'm working on new stories and working on a larger non-for-profit that came out of the book. When I thought about like how should we regulate this field, what should we do, how can we do better, like when I've sort of found out that maybe the first generation of AI tools in the world of work aren't as great as we hoped they would be. So, I was like, maybe we should build better tools. And who's going to build these tools? And, a lot of times I look around, I was like, well, who could build these tools? I'm not qualified, but there aren't a lot of people who do this in the public interest. So I was like, well, maybe I need to work on that. So, I worked on that a little bit today to build a broader coalition and get funding to do this kind of work.
You do mention that in the book, this idea of sort of building for the public good specifically, which we should talk a little bit more about. Okay, like what drives you? Get up in the morning. What's that fuel for you?
I don't know. Like, I think it's like I love working in teams, and I love like a challenge and looking at sort of new ways. Like, I have a lot of interest and a lot. I'm a reporter, so like sometimes I have to be careful because I get like, oh, I should look into this, oh, I should look into that,
So
and
it's
it's
your
like,
curiosity that's driving you then.
yeah, I
Uh,
think so. And like understanding like how do people live, how does this world work and how do other people's lives work? It's like I'm in a very privileged position that I feel like a lot of people tell me their stories. That's like really exciting and pretty amazing to be trusted with their stories and understanding like how their world works. And it's pretty cool. I get to work with people every day, even though I may sit, at my desk all by myself, but I get to talk to people, which I just love.
Yeah, no, it's the coolest thing. It's for me too. It's like, yeah, I get to talk to so many smart people. It's awesome. This podcast is all about getting people ready for the future. And usually we're talking about things tech that will enter the mainstream in maybe 2027, 2030, or even further into the future. But this topic today that we're talking about, AI and algorithms in the world of work, that's something that's happening now and something that
Yeah.
will continue to expand and proliferate moving forward. Tell us why you felt the need to write this book.
Yeah, yeah. I do ask myself, while I was writing the book, I was like, why did I start this project sometimes? When, it was hard, I was like, okay, well, okay, what am I going to write now? But I do actually sort of always had a North Star that I was like, okay, like I do want to know how this world works. And I want to tell people like two things, right? That I think a lot of people don't realize how ubiquitous AI already is in hiring and in the world of work. And also like, how does it work? And then unfortunately, also how it does not work.
I mean, I'm one of those. I had no idea like any of this was happening because I'm not in that world.
If you've ever sent an application via any of the job platforms like LinkedIn or Indeed or ZipRecruiter, all of them use some form of AI, but also a lot of companies use AI because companies keep complaining that they get millions of resumes. So for example, like Google gets like 3 million applications a year. IBM says they get about 5 million. So
Mm,
since the dawn of job platforms that we can sort of easily apply on LinkedIn or Indeed, on the other side, on the company side, they feel like, whoa, this is like overwhelming. We get so many applications per role,
mm,
and there is just not enough humans to go through them. So they look for like a technological solution. So we see, and the larger the company, usually the more technological solutions, right? Or the broader the application of technology.
mm.
So we see a lot of almost all Fortune 500 companies use AI in their hiring funnel. So either like resume screening or even finding applicants. We see it in one-way video interviews where you get pre-recorded questions on your phone. There's no one on the other side, and you just sort of record yourself answering those questions. We see games in the hiring funnel. We see AI-based background screenings. So all along, like we see it used in different ways. So it's pretty ubiquitous, like so much so that even a couple of years ago, the CEO of ZipRecruiter says like, your chances that a human first sees your resume is like really slim. It's probably like 80, 90, 100% more like a machine is going to read your resume first. And we see that like all large companies have applicant tracking systems. They used to be like sort of glorified spreadsheets where you looked like, okay, Hilke has applied, is she in the next round, or did we reject her, did she do this interview, did she do this assessment? But now most of those most of those tools also have AI built in some shape or form. There's a lot going on in the hiring world, and we see this also with monitoring at work. Like, we know the New York Times did this research and found that 8 out of the 10 largest companies in the US monitor their workers. And we also now that other companies like Starbucks and Delta Airlines and others use vendors that basically monitoring everything workers write on Slack and text and Zoom, and can find, do a sentiment analysis.
Essentially, we're going to get into all of that step by step.
Yes.
Essentially, it's a nightmare. Okay, it's a mess.
I didn't say
And
that, but it is pretty ubiquitous. And I think
yeah,
because job seekers often get rejected, they don't necessarily know what has
yeah,
been happening to them, right? Because you
yeah.
just get a rejection like you did 20 years ago.
Okay. The scale of the use of AI in hiring, in maintaining, in the whole process of the company relationship with their employees, and in the firing process is it's ubiquitous. And
Yes.
people
I mean,
and the
hiring
gap
process.
the
Yeah, in the firing process, we're starting to see signals, right? Like, we know that there was like productivity algorithms in warehouses. If you drop below a certain amount of times, right, you might get reprimanded and then fired. We see this with like a lot of drivers, right? They have like monitoring through GPS and other ways. So we see that those signals are being taken into account for firing decisions.
Okay, I want to get into like all the different specific things that are happening because you really went in depth in a very granular way with actually what goes on. But
Yeah.
but let's talk at a more general level. So what's going on is AI is mediating so much of what humans of the relationship between humans and institutions, humans and the companies they're working for, humans and like everything now. And what it seems like, based on what I was reading and what you're saying, well, look, I've been studying the internet and how it works and all of the things that are happening. And we know the recommender systems have proliferated across the internet. And that's all
Yeah.
we interact with. We interact with recommender systems, like whether we are on YouTube or on Netflix or shopping or just hovering around, browsing the internet. We'll get here comes an ad for X, Y, and Z because they've
Mhm.
been tracking us. And then now they're saying, you need to see this. You need to see this based on what we think or believe your interests are, because we want you to take an action. We want you to watch the film. We want you to spend more time on YouTube. We want you to buy this or whatever. But now this whole practice is is part of the world of work, people's careers, people's
Yeah.
journey through life, like making maybe the most important decisions, making whether I watch a film or spend another hour on YouTube or buy a coat. Who cares? It'll be maybe bad for my eyes, or maybe bad for my time, or maybe bad for my budget, but whatever. But we're
Yeah.
talking big time career decisions, life decisions, like impacting the whole the whole human in a very comprehensive, all-encompassing way. And most people are not aware of it.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of why I wanted to write the book. That I feel like, hiring is high stakes decisions, at least for, maybe not necessarily for the company because they hire a lot of people, but actually for job seekers,
The
it's a high stake.
individual.
Yes, like, I'm nervous before I have a job interview, right? Because it matters if I get the job, right? It matters to me. It matters to my happiness. Like, my identity is often tied to our jobs, right? But also, like, I mean, most people have to work to put food on the table and put a roof over their head, and it could be disastrous if you don't get the job. And so I think it does really matter. And it's a very much different if I get rejected from a job because I'm not the most qualified candidate. I would totally accept that, and maybe I would be sad, or I would like work on upskilling myself. But for example, I found out that in some resume screeners, one of the screeners gave more points to people who had the word baseball on their resume and fewer points to folks who had the word softball on their resume. So in the US, that's probably gender discrimination, right? Because more men tend to play and watch baseball, women traditionally play softball. Like if I was being kicked out for my dream job, of consideration because I have softball on my resume, that's like really unfair, and it's not okay to use something that is absolutely has no relevance to the job, and it's because of my gender. Now we have like tried for decades to move away from that, and we don't want to bring this in through the back door of algorithms. So I think
So
that's sort of the problem that I saw again and again.
so for the companies, so these massive companies are getting millions of resumes. It makes sense to even say from a positive point of view, look, we want to get lots of good people in. We want to give more people a chance. We want to expand the pool that we're hiring from. So they may even have good intentions with this. They're like, look, we're trying to be
Yeah,
competent
and I
here.
think everyone has good intentions, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
problem is with human hiring too, is like probably a recruiter would only read a fraction of the resumes, right? And would like as soon as they have 10 good candidates, would stop reading them,
Mhm,
and just move on because they don't want to read 2,000 resumes, right? So like
mhm.
it totally makes sense to have a technological solution. We just have to make sure it's bias free, and it doesn't bring more bias into the game. And I think the vendors often say like, oh, this is like going to be very efficient, you will
Yeah,
save so much in labor costs,
yeah,
it's bias free, and we'll also find the most qualified candidates.
yeah,
So it is absolutely efficient, companies save a ton of money,
yeah.
a ton of labor cost, but we haven't really found any evidence that the tools are bias free. In fact, I found evidence that shows that they actually have bias built in. And actually, we haven't seen a lot of evidence that the tools pick the most qualified candidates. And we know that companies know that too. So I think job seekers have long thought that, like, wow,
Yeah,
why am I, it must be the tech. I send so
yeah.
many applications out. I'm really well qualified. But we actually know from surveys of C suite and HR managers that almost 90% said that, in companies that use AI tools, they know that the tools reject well qualified candidates.
One of the things you write about is that there are a lot of poor quality algorithms out there being used to assess people. And companies trust these algorithms, these machines, even when they're faulty.
Because I think that the problem is like it looks like the algorithms work, right? Because they go over the resumes, you still get a ranking of people, and you still get like, number one is like 80.716% qualified for the job. It looks very mathematical, it looks very precise. And so, you still get those rankings, but what do you know what the tools predict upon, right? What keywords do they use? You don't know that as a recruiter. So it looks like the algorithm works, but because no one looks under the hood necessarily, right? And I found this again and again that often vendors who build the tool themselves, the software developers themselves, don't know what exactly the algorithm infers upon, why I'm qualified or not. And the companies that use the technology also don't know that. So that strikes me as very questionable practice, that companies wouldn't know and the vendors wouldn't know either if they stand in front of a judge to say, like, why was Jane Doe rejected? They can't say. And they don't know why Jane Doe was chosen or not. And I think that's sort of really problematic because it could be that Jane Doe was chosen because they had location Canada and Syria on their resume, some of the bias stuff that I found, which, could also be for other people who weren't chosen, could be that they were discriminated based on national origin. And that is illegal.
So even before we get to discrimination or bias or any of those kinds of issues that as a society we try to sort of fight against. So the companies are like, okay, we have 3 million applicants. I'm a big fancy company. I have lots of people want to work here. And I'm going to like have all these applicants. I don't want to toss 90% of them. I want to give everybody a fair chance. Let me use this AI service, this AI tool to help me scan
Mhm.
all of these resumes and find the best applicants. And then there are these people who build these AI tools, and they're like, yes, this algorithm is going to do this. It's going to be great. You're going to get the
Yeah.
best people. They'll be
Subjective.
amazing. They'll match you, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's happening on the one hand. Now, on the other hand, we have all of these humans who go to school for 20 or however long, 20 years, 25 years, right? Since they're like three. And they're like, oh, I worked all my life. My school has shaped me to go and find a job, one of these specific companies because that's where my career, that's my next career move. That's what I'm trained to do or
Mhm.
whatever. And so they're coming in. This is what they're primed and trained to do. And they're, instead of engaging with a company, with a human, with somebody that can assess them in some sort of a holistic way, they're bumping up against, based on your research, from what I read, a lot of faulty machines, a lot of faulty algorithms that are not actually delivering on what their owners or the people who are providing the
Yes.
service claim.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I do also have to say that, like, yes, recruiters technically could look at people more holistically, but human hiring is riddled with a lot of unconscious bias. And I don't think we actually want to go back to that, because people of color, women, and people with disabilities have been underestimated for decades, right? That's why they're underrepresented in leadership, in the workforce. And, humans do, like, we choose, like, one of the things is when you start having chit chat in a job interview and, oh, you went to the same school, suddenly a human will see you in a different light and not just look at your skills and qualifications, but sort of unconsciously as this, like, person they have something in common with, and that might bring in bias into the decision. So I wouldn't want to go back there, but what I'm trying to say is, like, let's not build those human biases into the system, because if we, for example, a lot of companies use they want to hire specific people that fit into their company. So instead of looking at, like, okay, here are the 5 skills that we need, resume screener, find those people with those 5 skills, and, we'll move them into round B. Turns out a lot of job applicants actually have the same skills. So you have, that wouldn't be a total screener. You would have, again, another 1,000 on the yes pile, right? So you give the resume tool maybe 500 resumes of the people you've been successful in the last year, and tell the tool, like, find out what makes these people successful. So that's where the problem starts. If you have a not diverse company, with a lot of companies struggle with diversity. So maybe you have, like, we see this especially in tech roles, right? We see that, like, more men traditionally have been hired, and that's probably where these problems like baseball and softball come from, because the tool does a statistical analysis. So probably people with the word baseball have been more successful in that company because the company has traditionally hired more men. But that's not what we want to keep repeating. So the problem is,
Well,
if we
the reason
base the tool on historical data, we might just replicate the
yeah, yeah,
old biased
patterns. Yeah.
decisions. Yeah.
I think someone was a Jan LeCun who said that all models, all AI models will be biased because they're built by humans. And so maybe it's about a conglomeration of different machines running this type of screener process.
I
Maybe
think
that's
so.
the solution.
So, like, I think you already pointed this out. Like, we need a more holistic hiring. Like, I think actually, like, we know that, like, personality is only like 5 or 10% predictive of your success in the job. So it's very little. So 95% of your success in the job has nothing to do with your personality. In fact, what our personality test, we can overcome that, right? I might be shy, but I can train myself to not be shy, right? So there's certain ways that humans can overcome that. But why are we using this as a screen? Like, a lot of companies use personality tests as screens to, like, throw people out of the loop, out of the funnel, and that doesn't seem to be right. So, like, can we have a more holistic thing that we actually test you for the 5 most important things and have an assessment, but also have a job interview, and maybe a little bit of personality thrown if you absolutely need to, but, like, just the one and done strikes me as pretty unfair.
I don't know. I have to tell you, the way I think about the whole thing is I don't even think the way that we assess people for jobs to begin with as humans, it makes any sense. I honestly think that they're looking at the wrong things, looking at wrong indicators, they're looking at the wrong assessments, and we need to rethink all of that. But that's probably another conversation.
Yeah. There might be somewhat easy ways. Like, it's like think about the capabilities and the skills that you need. And maybe you can, we know one of the best ways to test humans is to have them do the job. So
Yes.
it's not feasible
Yes.
for companies to hire you for a month and then let you go, right? Like, neither
Right.
company nor job seekers would want that.
Mm.
But maybe there is, like, some virtual reality applications to actually test
Yes.
some of these
Wow.
things. And we haven't
Yes.
we haven't really seen that. We've
Uh,
seen tiny bit of that, but we see more, like, sort of soft skills analysis through your Twitter profile. I've tested that and we've actually tested it in more scientific way with, like, larger sample sizes, and it is not predictive. It does not work. So I would suggest that people really do not do this because they might actually harm people. And also, like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't find the right people. So,
Hmm. And it's an
if you want
expensive
to, you can just use
waste of money.
a random number generator that is for free. Just use row 1, 3, 5, 7,
Uh,
9 on your Excel sheet and put those people in. That is for free, and it's actually fair. Although it may not feel fair to me because if
mm,
I'm on row 2 as a
mm,
job seeker, I might be pissed. But I think we also see this, like, the more data we take in. A lot of data scientists are always like, more data, more data. That does work for large language models, right? They
yeah,
get better at
yeah,
GPT with more data. But the problem is, in humans, we bring in all this other extraneous data.
yeah.
So suddenly
The model
the
doesn't know
computer,
what to do with it.
at your hobbies, something you really shouldn't be doing, at your first names. They don't look at that. So that's the problem. If we, and we've had now tests comparing, like, sort of old regression models that take like 4 things into
Hmm.
consideration versus now with, like, if you take every word on resumes into consideration, you have hundreds, thousands, and possible tens of thousands of words, right?
Hmm.
You have like a lot of more of these proxy problems coming in where baseball is really, or we have like playing lacrosse in high school was an indicator that says more about your socioeconomic background than your qualifications for the job, and we don't want to hire for that. So more deliberate thinking is, and more skepticism is really helpful here. And I think HR people are coming to that understanding now that they've
Mm,
had like this for a few years. Like, I've
yeah.
now talked to so many, especially after the book come out, that they're like, we did use this AI games for a couple of years, and then we realized we had the same questions that you have, and we didn't really think it worked, and we quietly let it go. The problem is, the quietly let it go, it doesn't make the tools better, or it doesn't inform the public, right? Because I think a lot of companies are worried about class action lawsuits, right? If they would say, like, we used a faulty algorithm for 2 years, and we that discriminated against a lot of women, they're worried that, like, there would be a class action lawsuit against them because they discriminated against so many women. So they don't necessarily want to tell us, and so that doesn't put pressure on the vendors to build better tools. So that's sort of a little bit that we just don't know, and job seekers have no idea. How could they possibly harm? They don't even know that AI is being used on them. How could they know what goes on the other side of the algorithm, right? And usually,
Exactly.
to bring a
That,
lawsuit forward in
yeah,
the United States,
yeah,
you kind of have to show some harm. But how are you
yeah,
going to show harm if you don't even know how you were
yeah.
assessed?
So yay, go Hilke for showing a lot, shining a light on this problem. Let's look at the different types of AI that are being used, or different types of algorithms, different type of processes that are being run on a job seeker. And I've listed them, and so let's go through them one by one. So first of all, resume screeners. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they're probably the most ubiquitous tool out there, right? Like, there's a couple of different ways that you can, because it speaks to the thousands and millions of applications that companies do get. And so there's like 2 things. One is like a job description, and it compares your resume, how much overlap there is. And that happens a lot. And I think you can actually, as a job seeker, there's places like JobScan and others who help you with that before you send in your application. So you can check, like, how much of my resume actually is there overlap to the keywords in the job description. And then we have the problem that I already discussed, where you take historical resumes from people who've been successful in your company, and built a tool that is kind of unsupervised, so you don't monitor exactly, like, okay, what does it actually infer on who's going to be successful. And that's where we see all of these problems coming in, of like biased hobbies suddenly become a predictor of success. Like, first names, we had one resume screener that an employment lawyer found that the word Thomas was a predictor of success. And the tool is probably right. Probably it was statistically significant, right? In the yes pile of people who've
Based
been
on the
successful,
data that it's
there
used.
probably were a
Yeah,
bunch of
yeah,
Thomases in there, and it
yeah.
was statistically significant, but it was just a correlation. It
Oh,
doesn't
had
cause
nothing to
anything.
do with Thomas's out there.
Yeah,
It's like,
sorry for all the differences,
yeah,
but you need to qualify you for anything. Obviously our skills, our work experience, all of that qualifies us. But the tool doesn't know that. It's not a human thinking machine. It just goes for statistical significance, and I think that's what we see a lot. That that there's sort of a confusion between correlation of two different things. Yes, Thomas may be an indicator of success in these historical resume, but that's actually, the name Thomas doesn't cause you to be successful.
Mm.
So I think we need a whole lot more thinking and skeptical take on these tools. But I think a lot of data scientists think, well, correlation is causation. If the tool finds something, there must be something there. And I think that's where we really need to interfere. Oh yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, again and again. Oh, well, there's a correlation, must be significant. I'm like, yeah, I mean, statistically significant, but does it actually cause that you're better at the job? No, it doesn't. Of
Does
course
it
not.
equate to you being able to do the job? I like your idea of using sort of virtual reality or extended reality as a tool to give people an opportunity to show how they would do in the job. And maybe they would prove that they could do even better than what the assessor was thinking. Someone may say, oh, I want to hire this kind of person to play this kind of role and to do these kinds of activities or whatever.
Yeah.
And that person may be limited in their own sort of assessment of what this role is and how well it could be performed. So people coming in, if they had an opportunity to, in virtual reality, demonstrate their ability, their efficacy, what they're about, their talents, and they may way surpass the goal or the evaluation, the benchmarks for
Yeah.
this particular thing.
You might also learn something about the job a little bit, right? Like, I mean, it's still, there wouldn't be a human you can possibly ask question, but you would learn a little bit. Oh, that's what they want me to do in the job. Do I actually want to do that? I mean, I think that's what, in the best of ways, like job
It
searches
could
is
be a
also
two-way
very, is this
assessment
actually,
process.
yeah. Um,
That's brilliant.
so,
We just came. This is we're solving a problem here. We're like, this is what needs to happen. We
I'm
need an
sure, and I
extended
was like,
reality tool that will do
um,
X, Y, and Z. It'd be a double-sided
yeah. I
filter.
mean, there's a lot of validation takes a long time to understand that the tool actually assesses what you want to assess, right?
Yeah,
And not just some random thing.
yeah,
So I think there needs to be a lot of thought put into it and like how would different people interact with the tool, right? People with disabilities, that's obviously a super big concern of mine. It's like folks who have a disability or maybe are older or something like that. It's like how the tool is like a one size fits all, which sounds great, but it's actually not that
not
great when you think
yeah,
about people with different abilities
yeah,
and people may have a motor disability. Is it fair that they can't play, that they may be, halfway through an AI game actually can't do it because you have to hit the space bar as fast as
yeah,
possible?
yeah.
Doesn't
So,
seem
so
totally
there's a lot of different things we have to think about. But you were talking
not
about
as great.
resume screeners. Then you
Yeah.
have social. This one I was really excited about because I've been talking about this. The
Uh,
social media
yeah.
scanner.
Yeah,
And
you also see social media scanners as like continuous background check of current employees. So not just when you get hired, somebody would check it, but you would consistently check, and you can check for like, things like, does she mention alcohol on Twitter or X, or does she mention, maybe she's a racist or something. You can infer those kinds of things, but you can also infer like who I really am, or at least the companies say. This is sort of like, when I thought about this, I was like, this sounds like Cambridge Analytica, where you can like from, in this case, they said, from your stuff on social media, we can infer what kind of voter you are, who you are. And it turns out actually the same Big Five personality test is actually part of this AI assessment. And some, the people who were doing some of the foundational research that led to Cambridge Analytica are also
hmm,
actually on the board of these
hmm,
AI companies. So kind of interesting. But the idea is, in everything I say and do, so everything I write on Twitter or put on my LinkedIn, you will find footprints of my personality, right? This is like, you can look under my hood. And I was actually a little bit scared doing this because I was like, maybe the computer knows more than me, and maybe, I don't have a
mm,
great personality. Maybe I'm just like, it turns out I did it with a industrial organization psychologist together, a Shamara Premazek, and he actually like loves AI and was like very excited about this. And it
hmm.
turns out we had like opposite personalities. Like my Twitter personality was so different than my LinkedIn, and I was
Okay.
like, well,
Yeah.
obviously the idea is underneath, if personality has to be stable, it can't change every 5 minutes if you want to use this for hiring, right? And then we actually, the same AI tool told me I was like super dominant in one social media, and then I wasn't dominant at all in the other social media. I was like, this seems all kind of
Well,
uh,
we,
over the
we yeah, well, the algorithms on the different platforms draw out different aspects of different people and promotes different aspects of different people. For example, like on Twitter, it would promote outrage, it would promote provocative, saying provocative things. It would bump that, it would highlight that. It also means that you are, as just a scroller watching your Twitter feed, you will be fed things to provoke, antagonize, outrage, and that's what the algorithm does. So you're going to have one personality on Twitter, whereas on LinkedIn, it's a whole different goal. The algorithm has a different goal for people to show, oh, look at me, I do this, I do this. This is what I've accomplished. This is what I've studied and learned, and blah blah blah. So it's algorithms at every step of the game. One of the things you talked about, which I thought was super fascinating, was even the jobs you see that you are exposed to, like the ads that you will see on LinkedIn, for example, is going to be specifically targeted for you based on what their
yeah,
algorithm thinks you're a fit for.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's insane, because you may not even be seeing. And this is why living in a world mediated by algorithms is problematic, because every single person ends up in a silo based on what information they're getting from the algorithms that they interact with
yeah,
across the
yeah,
board, platform to platform. And that
yeah. And the
is
algorithm also wants to please you on job platforms, right? So if you look for like middle management position, it will show you more of those, even though
exactly, you should
a
be
lot of
looking at a whole different level.
yeah, maybe a lot of women are maybe a little bit more shy when it comes to their achievements and abilities. So they may look for like they apply for roles when they're 120% qualified. So and they may look for like sort of more middle positions or something, middle management. Instead, like a recruiter would look at them and be like, actually, you should look for senior
Yeah,
positions. But the algorithm doesn't know that, so the algorithm
yeah,
just gives you back what you need.
yeah,
And often maybe men often are a little bit more confident about
yeah,
their
yeah.
abilities in general, not every man, but like in general, and they apply for jobs where they're only 60% or so qualified, but they're confident they're going to learn all this other stuff. So the algorithm will sort of see the signal that they're applying for more senior positions, and will show them those jobs, right? Or we see that like for most job platforms, it's not only looking for it's obviously wants to please the recruiter or the HR manager, because those are the people that pay to use the system.
Mm,
So it often looks at like not only who's the most qualified person to do the job, but also who is the most qualified person likely to apply.
mm.
So like me probably will very rarely be recommended, because I don't really engage with recruiters. I haven't applied for a job in 8 years. I kind of love my job. So, and I'm sure that that's reflective in the signals I give in on the behavioral side on LinkedIn and other platforms. So, and I think we see, overall, like the behavioral analysis shows that more men engage with them. So those signals then go
Yeah,
back into the
yeah,
algorithm and like
yeah,
change the
yeah,
recommendation system, right? So I
yeah.
think we have to like encourage people, like those are all signals. Like if you really want to work for a company, follow them, because actually that is a signal to the algorithm to look at like, okay, you are qualified and you like the company, you'll be ranked a little higher. But we don't know that our behavior, which can be actually very gendered and we don't know about, actually also feeds into the algorithm. So I think what I see a little bit of like a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel is a little bit with like inferred skills. So that what we see now too with big data, we can tell you have this and this title, you've been in this job for so many years, this and this programming language. Like the algorithm can also infer that like actually people with this title, with these skills, they also have these 5 other skills that I've seen again and again on resumes, and I can infer that you have those skills. So I can infer, the computer can infer that like, oh, you probably could learn this skill pretty easily. So I could recommend you to a recruiter saying, look, these are the 3 people that are most qualified, but here are the people that could really easily upskill with a 2-week class to come to where you need them to be. So it's a little bit of a leveler because it levels out sort of maybe women who are a little bit shy putting skills on their resumes. Like the tool learns from everyone. So I think that is kind of a good thing.
Yeah. And yeah, if it would actually work like that.
Yeah,
You
you need all like, I want long-term studies. Like I
yeah.
want, to see it all. I want to look into these recommender tools. I want to see like companies hire with traditional methods with AI and sort of keep looking at people years over years and actually understand like, was the person who was labeled by the AI is going to be very successful, not successful? Were they actually successful? That would be real knowledge for humanity. It would be really move us forward. But I haven't seen that, unfortunately.
You talk about AI based. So there are resume screeners, social media scanners, gamified assessments. Talk
Yep.
really briefly on that, and then I want to go to AI based video interview, which is
Yeah, yeah. So
now.
we see like sort of video games was all the rage a couple years ago. That like instead of like personality analysis where you have to answer all these hundreds of questions, right? Are you the life of the party?
Hmm.
Agree, strongly agree. It's like hundreds of questions. No one wants to do them. So
Hmm.
the idea was like, oh, let's get people to play a video game
Hmm.
uh, and we will assess their personality out of that. So what that often looks like, it's like, first of all, the aesthetic is like pre-Pac-Man. I mean, it's very, very basic video games. And one of the games, I had to like pump up balloons and collect the money before the balloon bursts. It's like kind of interesting because you're playing the game and you're sort of like, what do they want from me? Like, and what
Yeah,
does it have
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
up? Like, where am I pumping balloons and
yeah.
collect money? And it seems like kind of far away. So the way this works is like you often have like 12 or 13 or something games, and they're calibrated by people who are currently in the role. So say you have like 50 accountants maybe in the role. Yeah, they all play the game. And their game data gets compared to the general population. And maybe it turns out that your accountants are all risk takers. So
Mm,
the balloon actually apparently measures your risk taking propensity. Are you a risk taker or not?
mm.
So when I was playing the game, I was like, oh yeah, pump, pump, pump. So, and I was like, well, maybe I'm a risk taker in video games, but not in real life. And then the other question is like, I'm like super aggressive hitting those keys, and in life I'm like, but the question is also like, does risk taking actually have anything to do with the job? It could be that just your accountants for whatever reason they're all risk takers, but is that actually part of the job? There are all kinds of questions here that like
Yeah.
are not really clear. And some of the stuff, I already said, like, one of the games that I had to play is like hitting the space bar as fast as possible. And I was like, what kind of job do you have to hit the space bar as possible? Like it just
Right?
doesn't seem
Motor
to
skills? What are
connect
they testing?
kind of work. And then imagine if you had a motor disability and you
Yeah,
come
yeah.
across, you might get rejected for, even though you can totally do the job, whatever the
But the
job is,
test, you
probably
couldn't do the
doesn't
test.
have to hit the space bar as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But it could exclude a lot of people. And we know that often people with disabilities are not being into consideration because what we see with a lot of these tools, you have the training data and you have the results. You don't know exactly what the computer infers on. And so we see companies test the
Mm,
results. Men and women and people of different races go through the tool at different rates.
mm,
I've never seen a test for disability or
mm,
intersectionality where you look at white men versus black women, where we often see at these intersections is where a lot of the algorithms really become very biased. It's not being done. So I don't think people take people with disabilities into consideration here.
mm.
And if we want to increase diversity, I'm not sure if these products and tools actually work that well.
Do you know? Do you know one of the things I just want to say here? When we people diversity, there are people who want diversity and there are people who don't want diversity. And I think a better way to talk about it is to say the people who are the incumbents want to maintain the status quo. That's normal. That's human behavior. But having more people involved in the process, expanding the range of people who are participating in any industry, in any company, in any conversation, makes us all smarter, more effective, and is good for the bottom line. So if we want to take let's say we're a company and we're a $500 billion company. If we expand our pool of people that are coming in, the kind of information they're bringing in, the kind of ideas they have, the kind of genius that they bring from their lived experience, we could maybe take our company from a $500 billion company to a $1 trillion company. So I want it to be clear that diversity is not for the sake of altruism, because business people don't give two quibits about altruism. They're like, bottom line, why do I have to save humanity? My job is to make money. And so what I want to say is expanding the range of people involved at all levels of the organization, from the boardroom to the mailroom, is going to improve your bottom line significantly,
Yeah,
especially
and we know this from science. Like we know that
especially in
that
a
is
digitized world where everything is everywhere all at once. So what's happening in a totally different country with a totally different culture and a totally different language, a totally different set of people, is going to impact you, your company, your bottom line in a whole other world, because it's a tiny little world. So-called diversity, which we should probably come up with a different word now because there's so much pushback. We should just say, this is how you make money. How you make money. Have more people from all kinds of backgrounds. Bring their different kinds of genius in, because you may not think it's genius, you may not assess it as genius, but it is genius. And the solutions for the world as we move forward, whether it's the massive problems we have with climate or any of the other issues that we face as a planet, as a country, as an industry, as a company, it's more ideas from diverse sources that are going to solve those problems. So anyway.
I absolutely. I mean, also I would expand onto that and say that
Mm.
like, well, companies also do have a mandate to not discriminate. We want to hire people on merit and not because you like them, and we have laws for that, and we need to abide by the laws. I do think they should work to get people, any kind of people, in better paid positions and increase equity, and that is their social responsibility.
A lot of people in the tech world, they think that they're the smartest people in the world. Since they were 2 years old, they've known they're smarter. They know how to run computers. They know how to run the machines that run the world. They have a lot of power, and many of them don't give a hoot about people just for the sake of people. So you have to translate it and show them why this is valuable, this is useful, this is not altruism for the sake of altruism. This is actually going to make you better, you smarter, you more effective. It's going to make you more successful. And that's the only way to talk about it, because when we don't, we lose them. And the truth is, they're the ones running the world. That's what the fact is. I think we need to expand that pool of people who are running the world. But for now, that's what it is. Anyway, okay, so talk about the AI based. We don't have that much more time.
The video interviews.
Yeah, we have what? What do we have? Not that much more time. 20 minutes. Let's run through AI based video interviews, and then, yeah.
Yeah. So I think AI based video interviews are there's actually a lot of one way video interviewing right now. And if you talk to my students, they all know companies like HireVue and Modern Hire, and people a little older may not know or have ever heard of them, because if you look for a job in retail and fast food, in kind of like what companies often call like hourly positions at
Yeah.
large companies, there's either chatbots, there's one-way video interviews, there's all a lot of AI screens. And we see it, like, the last few years, we've seen it sort of move up a little bit into white collar territory for like data analysis. I have seen AI tools, have seen it for teachers at Atlanta Public Schools. They used HireVue's AI for at least a little bit. We've seen it, Delta Airlines hired flight attendants with AI one-way based video interviews. But I think it's sort of like a lot of younger folks who are just starting out trying to find these positions. They encountering these tools more
This is one
often.
of
Also, for recent graduates, I think it's the same sort of idea that a lot of HR folks feel like, oh my God, there's so many applicants to our like young potential or program, and I don't know, they all look the same in a way. Their resumes are very similar, right? They just got out of college, they don't have 10 years of experience, and what I really need is like agile people who like learning. So they come to these video games often to like find these specific personality traits, which we're not sure that actually works. So I think we see that a lot. And I think it also speaks to the power dynamic of some of these tools, right? That they're being used on people who have often the least power, right? People who work in retail and hourly positions are not the ones that are going to probably start a union and fight some of this, right? So we see this, it has like, it's very clear power balance. Like a lot of these tools are not being used on CEOs, and that's part of because you would only have training data for one person. That's not enough, big enough sample size. But I think also a lot of these CEOs would be like, I'm not doing a one-way AI based video interview. Like, what are you talking about, right? So,
Exactly.
there's definitely a power dynamic at play.
So
And yeah.
now we know why the young people are so depressed and have given up with, because this is what they're doing. They're having to interact with machines, and that's inhuman. I'm sorry, I have a lot to say about that. Let's go on. So
Yeah, and a
go.
lot of to echo that, a lot of job seekers have told me that they feel this is inhumane. They don't get to ask any questions. They have to like record
What the
themselves. It's
hell?
so weird.
The hell is
Um,
that?
and they feel like the companies are showing me how they're going to treat me. That's how they
Exactly.
feel. I mean, there's also some people who like it because they can do it at like midnight on a Sunday whenever they have a minute. And, some people may have anxiety when they meet strangers, and this might be easier for them. So, I mean, there's overall, I would say 9 out of 10 people hate it. And then there's like some people who do like it. I don't want to discount that. But the idea is like you get like a link sent to you and it says like, do this video interview, sit in a quiet room by yourself, and you have it either on your computer or on your phone, and you get pre-recorded questions or like little videos of people interacting. Like maybe there's a fight between, you're applying for
Yeah.
a call center employee job, and somebody calls the customer service line and says like, I'm really upset and la 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 la, and then you have to like solve the problem, and like how would you speak to them? That gets recorded. And in 2018, when I started this research, HireVue, one of the largest providers, who in November 2022 said they did their 30 millionth interview, a one-way video interview. So this is pretty ubiquitous, and it's not all AI. They also have, you can do both things. You can have humans watch the videos, or you can have AI score the videos. And we don't know what the percentage is. But at the time, the company was looking at facial expression analysis, the intonation of my voice, and the words that I say to score job seekers. How good will they be at a job? And the way they did it is like the effective computing, as it's called, like the emotion recognition. It's not facial recognition. It doesn't want to find out is Hilke. It looks at like, oh,
Yeah.
she's smiling, she must be happy. And it also compares my facial expressions to people who have been in the job and did the same video interview, a year or 2 years ago. So like if they smiled answering this one question and I smiled, that means we might be comparable. And, it should be on the yes pile. When I first saw this, I was like, wow, this looks like high tech. And, you see like the little
Yeah.
stipples on the screen, and it's
Yeah.
like, smiling 100% or something like that. Wow, maybe they did find a better way to hire. Maybe this is superseding humans. And, how wonderful would this be if we could do bias-free hiring? And when I started looking into it, I was like, oh, no, there is no science. There is no science what facial expressions we need in a job to be successful. There is really no science what facial expressions you need in a job interview to be successful in a job. And then also the assumption, the basic assumption of the system that
Wow.
when you're happy is actually not consensus anymore in psychology. In fact, emotion researchers told me very clearly that this is an outdated idea that like all humans have six emotions, or most, or an overwhelming amount of humans have six emotions. We all have the same, and that is absolutely not true. It depends on culture. I mean, there is, if we
So many
smile,
factors.
probably most folks would be happy, but I've been in job interviews where I smiled and I wasn't happy at all. We all know examples of this, right? So there's a
Now,
great,
now,
very,
now I'm smiling just to see when I smile. I think
uh,
a lot of the times it's
computer,
an
a computer
odd.
cannot recognize
Yeah.
forced smiles. It can just read, and it's very good at reading facial expressions. It's
Yeah.
just the assumption that there's an
That the
emotion
expression
underneath.
means the emotion. Yeah. Exactly.
We
Exactly.
actually can't, we cannot infer that. So the
Yeah.
whole system, was like, as I was looking at it, I was like, oh, I don't think this is valid science. And there is
Wow.
no, same with intonation of our
That is
voices. There is
insane. A ubiquitous tool not based on science. We are going backward.
I
How
do have
is
to say though, to
yes.
HireVue's defense, they did phase out the facial expression, the intonation of the voices a few years back. So there was like, I did something in the Wall Street Journal. Drew Harville had a big expose in the Washington Post. So
Oh, you call them out.
So they did phase it out. I think what is sort of like a little bit maybe problematic is like, they're the largest vendor. They're not using it anymore. So that's good. That's a good development. But it's a little bit like a whack-a-mole, because now we've seen other providers come out who also, I think, who see these technologies and be like, okay, there's a problem with hiring. We need to use, technology to help people with hiring. There's this cool tool that analyzes facial expression. We should use it. When we just established, like, no, 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 there is no science. Don't do it. But the next, there isn't a whole lot of
Yeah, yeah,
historic
yeah.
learning here.
It's a wild, wild west. Okay, so talk about being fired by an algorithm.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen like sort of now signals, right? That like when it comes to layoffs and hiring, that companies take signals of AI tools into consideration. And we also know this from like surveys from analysts who ask companies, if you have to let go people in 2024, how, would you take results from AI tools into consideration? And yeah, almost, half of the people said yes. At the same time, these like HR managers and C-suite leaders, they actually also did acknowledge that they know that the algorithms often are not working really well, but it's one of the few data sets that we have. And I think that sort of speaks to like, once we have the data, it is so hard to not go to the data. And I always like talk about Brian Kropp, who was an analyst at Gartner, said like he talked to a company that pre-pandemic did key swipe access. So it looked at like how many hours are you at your desk? Are you at your job to find people to promote? And already that's a pretty bad way of
That's a
promoting
bad
people. Like,
way.
it could be that you're just sitting at your
Oh, it could
butt
be
at
that
your
you
desk.
just have no life, and so you have nothing to bring to the table really, because all you do is work, and so you have no perspective and you're unhealthy.
Yeah, I
Please.
mean, also like it could be that you just sit at your chair, right, and like move your mouse. It doesn't actually mean that you do qualitatively really good work, right? So that there's not a good thing in the first place. But when the company during the pandemic needed to start layoffs, they were like, "Oh, let's look at that data." And the people
Wow.
that are not at their desk, that are that at their desk like less often, maybe they're like, maybe the assumption is they're quote unquote lazy, they're not coming to work, so maybe we should fire them. But we know since the pandemic, right, that like women with kids, parents who have caregiving obligations, people with disabilities, they have longer absentee times and they're protected classes. It is illegal to discriminate against them. So I think you sort of see this like as soon as the data is there, it just is like so hard to not go there, even the data is flawed. It's just like the
Yeah,
siren
yeah,
call. And I do
yeah.
think that myself, like when I did all of these tests, like even though I knew that sometimes there was no science underneath it, I was like, oh man, I scored a 76%. And I was like, of what?
Um,
But I sort of still was like, 76% is pretty good, right? It's
I know,
just hard to see it.
speaking of people sitting at their desk and keystrokes, it's
Mm,
if you're really smart and if you have vision and the big perspective, you can do in maybe 1 hour what someone without that will take 10 hours. So time spent at desk is not a measure of your ability to do the
uh,
job. Is can you do the job?
Yeah, in most jobs, actually hard to sort of define what makes you a high performer, right? Outside of like sales jobs, where I can check, okay, you sold so and so many table, and you're not an asshole, you don't create a toxic work environment.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it's actually really hard. What makes you a good teacher, a good filmmaker? It's like actually, it's like hard to do.
Yeah.
So the quantifying of the job into sort of discrete digital entities, it's actually really hard. So you can check keystrokes. You could check with like even heat-based stuff. If I'm actually sitting at my desk, you can take screenshots of me that I'm at my desk. It
Just
doesn't necessarily.
policing. That's just policing. That's
Yeah,
not
it's just
cool.
monitoring. And there's also like sentiment analysis that can check, are you a bully in meetings? Are you a racist? Are you prone to violence or prone to self-harm? And I think some of these categories, prone to self-harm, is like goes into mental health territory, which I don't think companies necessarily need to know about. And we also know that like monitoring increases stress and does not lead to better performance of employees. It just
Mhm.
increases stress. And kind of speaking to human ingenuity is like, we see this new term, productivity theater. So maybe you're working from home and boss is
Yeah.
really like making sure that you're at your desk. And people are pretty smart. They buy like mouse jigglers that sort of have keep your active bar, the green dot, always away from your desk. Or maybe somebody at like 8 a.m. checks in on Slack, ready to work. And then they have like, a good breakfast. And then they come back to their desk or they go to like, apparently like some employees spend an hour or so a day on this kind of productivity theater, show up to Zoom meetings that they don't need to go to because they're under this immense pressure from their bosses to show up,
Yeah.
that they're working somehow. And even
So
if the work is,
who's being fired by algorithms? Like which companies are doing that?
we've seen this at like, large delivery
Amazon?
companies, large warehouse companies that use drivers and check through GPS. And I've seen it in like National Labor Board relations documents where actually people have filed cases against large retailers in the US saying like, hey, I was fired for union activities. And then the large retailer said in their documents, oh, well, no. We use productivity algorithms. And the person was fired because they got under, they weren't performing according to the productivity algorithm. And I was like, are you saying you use algorithmic tools to fire people? Because that's actually what you're saying in these documents.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't a whole lot of, and I talked to people who work in these
Mm-hmm.
warehouses as supervisors who said, no, we got automated messages with what we need to read to people. And, they were like, I could put in the notes that the person, their father died and maybe today we're slow, but they were like, I don't think anybody reads that. And that's what I got again and again when from some of the drivers, like they said, yeah, I really wanted to deliver those packages, but I had a flat tire and I frantically messaged the company but they put in the message, I know you never read this, but I'm just sending this anyways because I want people to know, but no one ever knows. And they do get reprimanded for like not successfully delivering stuff and that can lead to firing. So yes.
I hike in this park. It's been shut down for a while because of landslides, but oftentimes there would be a prime driver driving through, breaking every law, moving all of the barriers to get up to a certain point that's much easier than if he had to go around. And he was intrepid. He was like, I'm like, this guy's crazy. Why is he doing this? This is insane. He can get in a lot of trouble. But he was like, I have to do this like a drone, set to target, go. And they're going because they're being run by algorithms.
Yeah, and they see it, how successful they've been, how many packages have they delivered. Everything is tracked, every delivery. And some fun of the funny things is like some of the drivers were also showing me like maps of like the GPS, like telling them to drive through rivers and like being like, why are you late? And they're like, yeah, that doesn't work. We use our own. But I mean, they're like everything is quantified, every little
Crazy.
thing. Um,
That is not
uh,
that is not a future that I want to be a part of. I want to run
Yeah,
through a
and I
couple
think
of things because
there's tension a little bit, right, between like companies saying we need creative people, critical thinking people, and then also this idea like, wait, I can check every movement that
well,
people
the
have.
data points, the data that they're looking at, measurable things that they're looking at are those kinds of things. How much time, how quickly, very specific things that can be tracked, but the really human things probably cannot be tracked by a machine. I mean, look, if we think about it, spontaneity, adventure, exploration, meeting people that we wouldn't plan to meet, which is where the most exciting, most powerful, most enriching things happen, where a company can actually maybe become a great company.
Yeah,
Those things are being obviated, and like, why? Why would you even want to do that? And another thing I was thinking about when I was reading the book, are smaller companies using these products?
not very. I mean, way less so
Do
because
you
they're
think
often
they're
also,
going to?
I think we see job platforms now
Mhm.
trying to like sort of, instead of a company buying a resume screener, you just do it through Indeed or LinkedIn, right? You have channeled
Oh,
all your applications and assessment through that. So you get sort of the same products, but you
aha,
don't have to build this gigantic infrastructure at your company. And ZipRecruiter and others already do that, right? If you as
right.
a recruiter look for candidates there and people submit their resumes, you do get ranked. So you get the quote
So you're
unquote
getting it
benefits.
anyway, even if you're not using it directly.
Yeah.
So, but when I'm hiring someone, I'm looking for a whole range of qualities, which none of which I think AI can evaluate for. Not even one. Loyalty, dependability, the
Yeah.
ability, not in any particular order, the ability to learn and be coachable, deep interest in the role, and alignment between the vision of the company, my company, and the person that's coming in. There must be that sort of, yeah, we can lock arms for the next 5 years because we're on the same path. I'm looking for at things that are so intangible. There's no way that some AI is going to be able to even think about that. Or the people building the AI, they're not even thinking about this. They think about how much data can we collect, and let's measure these things. And
Yeah, I mean, there is actually a huge movement to because everyone wants these soft skills, right? But they're actually the hardest to measure in quantifiable, but they're actually hard to measure, period, in general.
You give some tips. Okay, so I want to talk, we have a few minutes left, about the future now of work and where this is all headed. And also you give some tips at the end of the book for what people should do in this algorithm mediated world of work. So give us some tips.
There's like a couple tips for job seekers. I think what's actually really helpful is like ChatGPT. I think is actually going to be really helpful for job seekers to use that to help you write your cover letter, polish your resume. I think it can be really helpful, and you want to upload the job description and your resume, and it can help you like actually like sort of polish your resume, make it better. You can also ask ChatGPT what are the most commonly asked questions in job interviews, and maybe what are the best answers, to some of these cliche questions of like, what are your strengths and
So
weaknesses?
let's use AI to deal with the AI.
Exactly. So we see a lot
And
of
then
jobs.
basically we back to square one, because once we've removed the AI layer, go
Yes.
ahead.
Have your resume machine readable, have like new two columns, like a skills section, because we see more and more companies hiring for skills. I think also make sure you don't have a 6 month or longer gap on your resume, because we've seen resume screeners that reject people who have a longer than 6 month gap. I think also, I've also seen people who've been really frustrated sending hundreds and hundreds of resumes.
Resume.
um, they actually, some of them reported back that when they connected with recruiters and they knew the recruiter's name and connected with them on LinkedIn, that's how they got job interviews, sending their resume that way. That's like circumventing the AI in general. Same with like if you have an internal referral. And yeah, I think for like video interviews, there's like some test interviews you can do to like maybe take down the anxiety. Some people have said you should look into the camera, that gives you engagement scores, but we don't actually know that. We know very little how you're being scored. I know from higher view that if you have very short answers, it's very hard for the AI to score you correctly. So maybe elaborate and like tell like sort of a story how you used your leadership skills or your teamwork skills, I think might be beneficial.
So all of this is in your book. And the book is The Algorithm: How AI Decides Who Gets Hired, Monitored, Promoted, and Fired, and Why We Need to Fight Back. It's mandatory reading, whether you're in the workforce or not, if you want to understand what's actually happening out there and be a part of building a better world, a better world
Yeah.
of work, and a better world in general. Because if you think about it, maybe you're not in the world of work, but your family member is, and they're being subjected to these kinds of pressures, and it's just not fun. So mandatory reading, I will put the information about the book and how to get it and how to connect with Hilke in the description. And so please do that, because Hilke, what you're doing is so, so important. Now, what are you up to next?
There's like a couple things, there's a couple of things that are sort of in the book in the last chapter where I talk about like health AI and stuff moving into the world of work, where I think there's a real tension. Like, do I want my employer to know that I feel anxiety or that I feel anxious today or depressed? Like, but we will have more and more of those tools. So I think like looking at health and AI and how that maybe has, like gets amplified in the workplace, some of the problems there, I think is definitely what I want to look at. Then I'm also building this, nonprofit to test some of these tools,
Tell
audit
us
some of these
tell us a little
tools.
bit quickly about what that is and how people can get involved.
You can always find me on LinkedIn. I also have a faculty page at NYU with my email address, but I'm also very active on LinkedIn. And there's only one Hilke Schellmann, so you will find me. And I'm building sort of like larger coalitions. Like I work with like sociologists, computer scientists, and industrial and organizational psychologists to actually like sort of build out this like auditing. Like I do feel like our world is going to be mediated by AI, so let's skill up journalists and other folks to actually do this kind of testing. And can we build like sort of testing frameworks that others then can copy? So I always tell people like, steal my methods. Like if
Yeah.
I can test these algorithms and they break on impact, if Hilke Schellmann tests them, you can do that too, because I'm not a machine learning
Yeah.
coder. I can't build any of these tools, but I sort of know maybe now a little bit what sort of the vision is for these tools. So I want to work with others to build these tools and put that to really do like public interest work here and sort of be like, okay, let's build better tools and put that into the public knowledge and make people use those tools versus maybe using tools that we don't know how people are scored and all the stuff that I found problematic on my journey. So I think that's happening. I think those are pretty
Yeah.
big projects that I'm
Very,
working on.
very important work. I mean, really, really,
Number
really
two for
vital.
a lot of people wanna see that. So I'm definitely not stepping away from algorithms at work.
We can't. It's the alien in the mix. We all have to deal with it. This is awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned so
Thank
much. And I think our listeners are going to be like, yes, I have to get this book. I have to do this. This is so important. Make sure to listen, follow, and subscribe for new episodes wherever you get your podcasts and on our YouTube channel.